Hey, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. All right, well, let's get started. Hopefully, I believe I've got everybody muted now. Yeah, it looks like everyone's muted, so you guys should only be able to hear me. Perfect. Haven't used WebEx in a while, sorry guys. So welcome to the PhoneGap talk. We're going to be talking about mobile HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is going to be an introductory talk, and then we're going to talk about mobile web a bit. And depending on time, we'll definitely take questions at the end, but depending on how much time is left after I finish, we can spend a little bit of time maybe doing an intro to Hello World, a quick Hello World on iOS, possibly Android, and then I can also show off build.phonegap.com, and maybe I'll get to some winery as well, for those of you who have not seen it. So, who am I? My name's Steve Gill. There's my Twitter handle. Feel free to tweet me during the presentation or after the presentation. I like hockey and beer, so I am obviously Canadian. Before I leave this page, I want to let you guys know, so I work at Adobe. I've been a part of the PhoneGap team for about 2.5 years. I'm mainly in charge of doing some tooling, and I also handle a lot of the community. So if you guys are interested in doing meetups or that type of thing, let me know. Feel free to contact me. So what are you guys all here for today? What I always like to start off with is speaking about the problem that exists currently in mobile development. As you guys can see, there's a bunch of different target OSs. You got iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, and a few others. There's different development operating systems. Apple, you got to use, for doing iOS development, you got to use an OS X machine. For Android, you could use either. For Windows Phone, you got to use Windows. For Bata, you got to use Windows. And along with the different development OSs, you have different languages. Objective-C, you got to learn. Java. RIM's already doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but it also has some Java as well. You guys can see the main issue here is that there are a lot of different operating systems that you might potentially want to target. There's different OSs and different languages you would have to learn or hire. If you're in charge of a business, you have to hire different developers to do different things. So you have a super hybrid developer who can do everything. Like I just said. So you guys can see it's a pretty big issue, and it frustrates a lot of developers or a lot of people trying to reach as many markets as they can. Predicting how developers are doing seems to be impossible. In 2008, BlackBerry still dominated the global market share. It was #1 by far. In 2009, iOS took over. It became #1 for global market share. And then nowadays, Android's dominated. And that seems to be the trend so far. It's been the dominating mobile operating system. But you'll still see more and more people developing for iOS over Android. And fragmentation is starting to become a very big issue as well. A lot of devices are still using Android 2.3 or Android 3 or just older versions. And now you're starting to see ice cream sandwich devices come out. I personally have a Galaxy Nexus sitting beside me. And who knows what's to come in 2012. But don't worry, guys, the internet is here. And by that, I'm going to dive into what I mean by that. So, problems web technology has already solved. Web technology is already on many operating systems. It already works on many devices and screen sizes. That's pretty huge if you think about it. You already have websites that are working on your mobile devices and are working on in your desktop. It's already hitting, Mac, Windows, Linux, as well as iOS, Android, Bata, BlackBerry, and there's also many SDKs. It's another problem web solves. With web, it's just the web, web technology. The problems that remain. So the web isn't perfect, as much as I'd like you to believe that. The web is sandboxed. So this is a feature, not a bug. That means, the web doesn't have access to all your computer, like your file system and things like that, even though this is slowly starting to change. Currently, the web has poor offline storage. Now, with HTML5, there is local storage is included, session storage. There are other ways to check if you're online, offline. So you can potentially build an offline web app using some caching, but it still isn't very well used. It isn't really there yet, but it's slowly going in the right direction. The web can't participate in App Store distribution. So what this means is you can't distribute your web apps, in the Android market, in iOS App Store, things like that. And with that, it also becomes difficult to generate revenue. This is a pretty big drawback for the web currently. It's an issue that is trying to be solved. Google's trying to solve it with the Google Chrome web store, but it hasn't really picked up yet. I think Mozilla is also doing something similar. Hopefully there is a trend for it. The web can access device APIs. So the web on your phone can access the camera, for instance. It can access your contacts. It can access other APIs, which I'll get to shortly. And the web has shitty tooling. Enter PhoneGap. So now we can actually begin talking about what PhoneGap does. It's a hybrid development, combining the strengths of web with native environments. The first project to bridge a native browser instance to device APIs. All the benefits of the web without hiding the native platform's internals or tooling. So just to get into it, there's a big debate in the US that you keep hearing about is, should I go native or should I go web? What's the solution? Native's got better UI maybe. There's a lot of different points people are making. But with PhoneGap, you can actually have the best of both worlds. You can write using web technology, and you can access those native features that you would get with native. And with PhoneGap Plugins, you can even extend that to the UI if you want to get some more native UI. PhoneGap really does solve that problem, the hybrid approach. What PhoneGap is not. So we get a lot of questions, and especially at the end of this, I might get some of these, but hopefully I won't. An IDE. We don't dictate tooling choices. You can use whatever tools you want. That said, Dreamweaver does have good PhoneGap support. PhoneGap is not a language. The web is the platform. You're not writing in PhoneGap. You're writing in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. PhoneGap's not proprietary. Everything we do with PhoneGap is open source and Apache licensed. It's based off of a project called Apache Cordova, which I will get into in a second. A runtime. Shipping a runtime is prohibited to downloading apps over a network. So you can't, on iOS, for instance, you can't run a PhoneGap shell and then have it point to your mobile website and then just display your mobile website. The guys at Apple would reject that because then you could essentially change your app anytime you want. You never have to send updates to the App Store. what PhoneGap is, free and open source software, Apache version 2 license. It's built with web standards, existing and emerging. So we work closely with the W3C Device API Working Group and a few others that are doing this to follow the standards that they're defining. We also like to help with defining the standards. This is for getting access to device APIs. So their whole purpose is to have the browser get access to those APIs. That is one of our goals as well. We'd like to see the browsers on mobile phones getting better. It is open across multiple platforms. So we support a ton of platforms, as you guys saw earlier. iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Symbian, Bata, and that includes Bata 2.0. Windows Phone, which is getting very popular right now for us. Active and diverse development community and committership. Adobe isn't the only ones who are committing to PhoneGap right now. IBM's also a very big contributor, and a few others, RIM, Microsoft, and lots of individuals like yourselves. And we'd love to get you guys to contribute as well. And I could talk more about that later on as well. So I've mentioned this a few times now, but PhoneGap is powered by Apache Cordova. What does that mean? So when the company I used to work for, Nitobi, was getting purchased by Adobe back in October, a part of the deal was that we got to submit PhoneGap to Apache so it would stay open source and free forever. The reason PhoneGap even got as popular as it is today was because it was open source from the beginning. And we don't want our users to think that we're going to take that away, and this was our way to assure that. So I don't actually work on PhoneGap. I work on Apache Cordova. PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova. So the way we like to describe it is, in the browser world, you have WebKit, and Chrome is based off WebKit. It's a distribution of it. Safari is a distribution of WebKit, and so are Androids and iOS's mobile browsers, and the BlackBerry mobile browser. So in the same sense that they are distributions of WebKit, PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova. Hopefully that makes a little sense. It's nothing to be confused about. We're still using PhoneGap as kind of the user front. The brand is built on PhoneGap, and it makes it easier for us to print shirts and that kind of stuff, give stickers out. So here's a few things I just said. There's no difference between the two. PhoneGap has been and will always remain free and open source software. So if you guys do decide to use PhoneGap or are already using it, you never need to worry about that. PhoneGap corporate support. So this is what I was mentioning, some of the companies that are contributing to PhoneGap or Apache Cordova: Adobe, IBM, Microsoft, RIM, Nokia. And there's tons of individuals as well. PhoneGap and web standards. I had already mentioned this a little bit, but we track various W3C groups. Our main focus is on the Device API Working Group. That's why I mentioned that one earlier. We also track HTML5 Web Apps Working Group, the W3C Widget Group, and others. We work on a few community groups as well. There's some pretty neat tools out there that show the flaw in browsers right now. PhoneGap philosophy: simple and better. So when in doubt, use brute force. This is kind of how we started it off. The web solves cross-platform, across devices. So we're not doing anything new. We're just supporting the web. We were all web developers, and the main people who use PhoneGap are generally web developers, or they want to get into doing some web development. Free open source software has been proven to be the best model for platform development and ecosystem creation. Hold on, guys. Let me make sure everyone. Hopefully, I still am recording. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure I was recording this so I can get it after. Simple is better. Okay, so I've just talked about this. There's a few other things that we want to touch on when we talk about the PhoneGap philosophy. Our goal with PhoneGap when we started, and still is for PhoneGap to not exist. We wanted the browsers to have the abilities that PhoneGap gives it. We want the browsers to be able to, have access to your camera or other APIs. Now there is security issues with that, and that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen things like your camera being accessible by the browser and your contacts being accessible by the browser. And those are valid as well. But I also like the approach that, say, when you're on a web app and you want to use geolocation, a permission will pop up on your iOS device saying, hey, is it cool if I use geolocation? And the user would have to click yes. So that approach works. It may not have worked for everything, and I'm not really one to jump in on that debate. But our goal has always been for web developers to have the ability to write apps and compete with the native side. You don't want to have to learn native to be able to develop for these devices. So the way we work, we're a foreign function interface. So that's how we're describing it between a Chromeless browser instance on the device and the native platform code. So what that means is all PhoneGap does. We don't do any compiling. We open up a browser instance on your phone, on your devices, and then we set up a bridge. Sometimes we call this the hack or the bridge. So on iOS we used the URL for the bridge. So we set up this bridge to talk between native code and the JavaScript API that we have. So all you would need to do is use that JavaScript API, and it would do all the native functions that we've already written for you in the native code. It's a blunt method. It definitely required brute force. Some of our implementations are very brute force. They're different per platform, and we implement PhoneGap for every platform we support. But all of our platforms support the PhoneGap API. So as a PhoneGap developer, you would just have to write your code once, make some modifications maybe for CSS, or if the API is a little different, there are some quirks here and there that are documented on our doc site. But other than that, you should be able to write your code once, and it should run everywhere. The technique has scaled to 8 platforms and up to 300 operations per second. So PhoneGap is very much fast enough for nearly all native call negotiation use cases. So there isn't very many cases where you would have to have more than 300 operations per second. So our philosophy, the web solved cross-platform. The web's already on there, and we're using the web, and it's available on all of these platforms. PhoneGap project goals. The web is a first-class development platform. So install the web apps, no sandbox, good tools. That'd be amazing. That is something we'd love to see happen. And like I said earlier, cease to exist. Reference implied for web standards. So the device API working group was created because of PhoneGap, because we started doing stuff like this. PhoneGap is free to use, to modify, to distribute, to sell. You guys can do whatever you want with it. We don't care. Device APIs are truly cross-platform abstraction targets. So the APIs that we target, we categorize them into 3 separate ones: sensor, data, and out. Our API is generally the lowest common denominator among all the platforms. There are some device platform-specific APIs we could implement, but we decide not to because it'll take away from the cross-platform model that we've set up. But to handle that type of stuff, so say you do want the iOS tab bar, for instance, we've created a plugin architecture where you can access any of the device APIs by creating a plugin for it. And there are already a lot of plugins that exist, and I can show you guys where they exist in a little bit. The device sensors, the ones we support: camera, accelerometer, magnetometer, and GPS. Device data, so file system, and that includes file upload and file download, file transfer. It's actually a very solid API, and a lot of people seem to use that one. So you could take a picture and you could upload it right to a server you have set up. media, so things like audio and video, especially if they're not working on some platforms. I believe older Androids and even maybe newer Androids don't have proper audio video support in the instance, in the web browser instance we open up. Contacts, if your app requires contacts. PhoneGap plugins, unlimited extensibility. So I've already talked a bit about plugins. So every PhoneGap API is a PhoneGap plugin, essentially. Every API is designed the same way that we want to get plugins to be designed. Eventually, our goal is going to be so you can just use a specific. You can tell your before you get started, you would say which APIs you want to use, maybe a checkbox or maybe some command line tooling, and only those APIs would get included. So it would even shrink the PhoneGap.js or Cordova.js file, and you wouldn't have all that extra unnecessary code. There's third parties are building plugins. We're not the only ones who are building plugins. Facebook has built a plugin. Salesforce has built a plugin. And there's so many more. To actually take a look at them, just to step out real quick, you can go to github.com/PhoneGap plugins. Here we go. And you guys can see they're separated into directories. Go to iOS, for instance, and there's tons. There's power management, date picker, email composer. You guys can name them. There's so many in here. The Facebook one's not in actually this repo, but it's in a different repo. But hopefully shortly I'll be moving it into there actually. Once again, before I move on to problems and weaknesses, before I move on to problems and weaknesses, I just wanted to mention that plugins, if you do want to develop plugins, it does take away from the cross-platform portion. If you want to target Android and iOS, you would need a plugin that did the same thing for both. And the plugin, generally, you'd have to do a bit of native code as well as JavaScript code. Oh, I have a person saying they can't see my screen anymore. Is this an issue a lot of people are facing? Can you guys see my screen? Okay, there we go. I'm very slow to update. Sorry about that, guys. Must be my connection. Greg's saying he wants to see me build an actual app. Sorry, Greg. Greg's connection is working. This talk was more focused on an intro and less on building an app. I will try to get to an app near the end here, just to show some functionality. I'm almost done the slides. PhoneGap problems and weaknesses. So the web versus native. These are problems that you guys see. Oh, sorry to hear that. Device browser variants. Web dev is hard. So these are the three problems we seem to run into. PhoneGap plugins invalidate the web versus native debate. With PhoneGap, the web is native. PhoneGap browser parity. PhoneGap is based on the onboard platform SDK WebKit, but there's different forks. So this is an issue we do run into. There are different builds of WebKit on different platforms. iOS 4 has a different build compared to iOS 5. Android, this is very visible. Some of the older Androids don't have a very good WebKit implementation. Ice Cream Sandwich has a very good one, though. We can and sometimes do build our own WebKit. We've tried this to include our own WebKit instead of you guys using the native Chromeless one that's included. But the size of your apps would just grow massively. It'd be over 20 megabytes instead of less than 25 kilobytes. Android performance is not quite the same level as iOS. And like I said, this is due to the browser parity. Windows Phone is running IE9, which actually has pretty good standards and performance, but there are some issues you run into. And if you guys go down that route, you guys will experience them. Web dev is hard. It is, and the best solution is to go and code. The only way to get better at web dev is by coding. Looks like somebody's mic got turned on. Give me 1 second. There we go. I think when someone joins, their mic is automatically on. First priority is contribution. So an open source project is only as healthy as its activity. So we really want to recruit you guys to come and contribute. We can't recruit people for committing to the project's slowly going to die. And we also want more plugins and that kind of stuff. There's lots of work to do, more work on docs. If you want to start with docs, that's a great way to get started. If you want to contribute, I'll give you guys a site at the end. Release philosophy. So we ship for anyone who's already using PhoneGap. Our usual way of releasing is with major release, minor release, and patch. Plugins are free, yes. Generally agreed upon goal for each month, ship an RC 2 weeks in, and then hardening the minor at the end of the month. So we try to do a minor a month. So actually tomorrow we're releasing 1.8.0. We prioritize shipping over a particular feature, issue, bug, or task. So if there is we don't actually let our releases be held back by something that it is. If there's a feature we really want to get in and it's not ready, we don't let our release get held up. We usually push that feature off to the next version when it's ready to go. And this way we keep a constant, release cycle. And if there are little bugs, it's easy to get fixes out to people because every month there's a new release that comes out. It's the best way to stay on top of bugs, and there's a bunch of different companies that are doing this. We're aiming to ship our next major in July. That's going to be 2.0. I saw somebody already mention it in the comments. PhoneGap Day is July 20th, and we are doing a big conference for it. So things to expect in 2.0. Plugins for all things. It's all right, Carlos. Things to expect in 2.0. Plugin for all things. So what this means is we're actually going to document the plugin structure. It's not documented very well, and everyone that's been making plugins has been kind of making them however they see fit. But we're going to standardize a little bit more, and we're going to release some better documentation for this. And hopefully this will make it easier for people to install plugins and discover plugins and that kind of stuff. And we're going to be working more towards that. Consistent automation and CLI tooling for common development tasks. So we're actually working on some command line tooling. So you don't have to develop your apps, and you don't have to go through Eclipse and Xcode to do everything. We were hoping to do a lot more of it with command line tooling for people who are interested in that type of stuff. Better support for Windows Phone, Cordova View. We wanted to get this out in 1.8. In 1.8 for tomorrow, but it got pushed back to 1.9, and hopefully it's in there. And this will allow you to have multiple WebView instances running within an app. Here are some useful links: PhoneGap.com, PhoneGap support, PhoneGap wiki, documentation, docs.phonegap.com. That's a big one. Apache Cordova, so that's the Cordova site. And if you are interested in contributing, go to cordova.io, check it out. There's instructions on there on how to contribute. There's our Facebook and our Twitter page. And now with that, I'm going to show you guys, let's see how much time I have. What else can I show you? How about I take a few questions right now, and then I will do a iOS Hello World, and I'll show Winery off, a really cool debugging tool. I didn't mention it, but I'll talk about it once I'm debugging it. And then I'll show you guys some PhoneGap builds as well, and then we'll go from there. So before I jump into doing the Hello World, do we have any questions on the slide? Hold on. There's still another mic. There we go. Any questions? Where can I see these? Give me 1 second. Yep, Winery is Web Inspector Remote. Any good videos, how-tos on getting started using PhoneGap? So for people who want to get started, if you go to phonegap.com/start, it actually directs you to the Getting Started guides on docs.phonegap.com. And then these are generally very good walkthroughs on how to get started. We did have videos at one point, but they tend to get outdated with all the new versions we release. So if you do want to find those, you could go to youtube.com/ I believe PhoneGap. But if not, they might also be on youtube.com/Naitobi, which was our old one. So there are some old ones in here, like there's PhoneGap Build Quick Guide, Getting Started with PhoneGap Build, and there's a few quick start getting set up videos. But we are moving everything over to the PhoneGap repository, the PhoneGap channel on YouTube. So go check it out. Let's see what other questions we have. Oh, screen isn't updating. Can you guys see my screen? I keep seeing people having issues. But the two links were youtube.com/PhoneGap and youtube.com/Naitobi. Naitobi had some of our older videos before we got purchased. We used to use that one. And I was showing PhoneGap.com/start, which leads you to docs.phonegap.com and the Getting Started guides there. I can share the slides and the video. I believe the video, the people from Bootstrap will be sharing it. I am recording it, so hopefully they will send it out. Sorry, all this screen switching seems to be giving people some issues. How does performance of web views compare with native views? So it's fairly good. Native generally has like some issues that we've had in the past. Native's had better scrolling. You couldn't really have fixed position scrolling. Fixed position didn't work on iOS before and older Androids. So for scrolling, you'd have to use some libraries like iScroll, Scrollability. But with the newer, with the updates, you're seeing more and more people not use that. Fixed positioning is fixed now, so that's a big plus. There's still some issues with it, but it's slowly getting better. Other than that, usually what it depends on is the developer. You wanna use, for the newer devices at least, you want to try to use some CSS transforms. 3D transforms are hardware accelerated on iOS. You want to there's a few WebKit CSS properties you could do to remove tap highlighting and better scrolling. There's a good blog I read on it. I wonder if I could find it real quick. Here it is. I'm just going to paste this in the chat. But Max is a big kind of Node PhoneGap hacker, and he wrote this very nice blog after he did a talk about fast web view applications, and he gives you some pretty good tips on how to speed up your applications. So take a read on that when you guys get a chance if you guys want to improve performance. Any other questions? Or I think I'm going to move on, and then I could keep taking questions in between. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you guys is I had people ask how to just get started, I guess. So for Xcode, after you would install PhoneGap, you would just go New Project. And if you've installed it, I don't know if you guys, can you guys see all the chat in this presenter screen as well? If so, I'm just going to move to a different. I will anyways. Oh, Cordova name origin, street or city. I'm trying to get rid of this guy. No, I'm not in Eclipse. I'm in Xcode right now. It seems to not want to anyways, I'll deal with it in a second. But when you click File, New Project, it should come up with this screen, and you click Cordova-based application. You can name it. So I will name it Bootstrap. And you can save it somewhere, click Create. And now it should create the Hello World application. But before it does, there's one more step. And we're hoping to get rid of this step in 2.0 by adding some new command line interfaces that you can kind of avoid this. But what you first have to do is you have to build it. So I'm just going to do a Command B and build it. And as this, it should be built. And then I should show this in Finder. And there's a www directory. So this is the step we're hoping to avoid, but what you have to do is you have to drag this and drop it onto your project and create folder groups for any folders. I believe that's what it is. But if you're ever unsure, you can just go back to the Getting Started guide, click on iOS, right when you drag it. Oh, and as you're creating your project, it should say Use Automatic Reference Counting. It should not be checked. It's an important one. I believe mine is set to that automatically. So we need to drag it. We've done that part. Create folder references. So I do have it on the wrong one. So we want to have it as select folder references for any folders. And then once that's done, we could select where we want to run it. I'm going to run it in the iPhone simulator and click Run. Cordova is working. So this is the Hello World application that it builds. And I can look at the JS file that it includes. So I was actually running the release candidate. And it gives us an index.html, which is kind of nice. Before I describe this, I see we're getting a few more questions. Greg asked, PhoneGap, I thought PhoneGap was about cross-platform. Does PhoneGap require OS X specific tool? The answer to that question is PhoneGap generally you still need to have the SDK is required. So to do iOS development, you need to have the iOS SDK. That's the only way you're going to get it on your device. That's the only way you're going to be able to submit to the App Store. Android, you can still do Windows or Mac. So this is an issue that we're still dealing with. And our solution currently, now that you asked, is to use build.phonegap.com. So it's our cloud-based service, and all you would do is you would just create a new app. You can name your app anything you want, and you could create a new Git repository. You could pull from Git SVN repo, or you can upload an archive or index.html file. And once you do this, we will actually build the app for you on our servers, in the cloud. I don't have iOS building right now just because I didn't select my key. So if you do want to build for iOS, you will need a Mac at one point to do your provisioning profile stuff that Apple wants you to do. And then you can upload that onto here, and then you could use your iPhones or your iPods, and you could actually scan the QR codes that come here, and it will install the application on your device. So this is a great way to share it with your clients and things like that. You just add them to your Build account and go from there. Build is currently in public beta, and it is free. There will be a payment portion of it, but there will always be a free version as well. And you can have as many public apps as you want, but if you want private apps, then you would just sign up for one of the plans. And by private and public, we're kind of going with a similar GitHub model, where you can have private repositories that no one can see the code, or you can have public ones. But this is still in public beta for a while, so if you guys want to check it out, go for it. Free to sign up. Back to the application here. So you could use, so UI development will be done in HTML. I see Carlos talking about that. So that is generally our approach. We tell people to use, we usually tell people to use CSS to do your UI and develop for your brand. Don't develop for standards of the devices. Your app doesn't have to look like every other iPhone app. You can really develop it to look very specific to your application, to your brand. Some good examples of PhoneGap apps. You can see Wikipedia. You can see something like Zombie Zombie or Mafia War Shakedown. Halo Waypoint, I think, has an app. And there's a bunch of other ones as well. When it comes to JavaScript frameworks, another question a lot of people have, people like to use things like jQuery or Sencha. PhoneGap supports all JavaScript frameworks. Because you're writing an HTML, JavaScript, CSS, you can use whichever ones you want, whatever you can use whatever you want, and you can, proudly support it. When we develop apps ourselves on the PhoneGap team, we generally don't use any JavaScript frameworks. We find them to be, they just usually have a lot of unnecessary code that we don't need. So we usually just shim together any pieces of code we need. For instance, a lot of people like to have, in jQuery, they like to have something like the $, which is like a query selector. So we can just go $ equals document dot query. My spelling's a little off right now. I came from Australia. I got back from Australia yesterday afternoon, so my body feels very jet lagged. I am based in San Francisco, but you could do something like $ equals query document dot query selector, and then now you have the $ representing a query selector. You could still grab IDs and classes and that kind of stuff. Carlos is showing the way how to do it on Dojo. So let's get back to this app. I want to hide that, but it's not working out so well. What I'll actually do is I'll actually open this up in TextMate. It's a little easier to play with. So you guys can see it's just got the Apache license header. We got a few things. So this is one that I like to point out, the viewport tag. And this tells your browser things like what the width should be, the initial scale. So with this device width right here, this means don't make your web app larger than the width of the device. This is how you handle, this is how it conforms to different browser sizes. Initial scale 1.0 and maximum scale 1.0. So this is just standard, and it's saying it can't go bigger than that. And user scalable, no. So the user can't zoom in, zoom out, that kind of stuff. If you wanted to develop for different screen sizes, like an iPhone compared to an iPad, the way you would do it is with media queries. So right here, you can see that media, so this is commented out, but this is in the default Hello World application if you want to use it. So it says only screen and max device width. What it does is media, and it checks only the screen, and if the max device width is 1024 pixels, then it's going to use an iPad.css file. If the max device width is 480 pixels, it's going to use an iPhone.css file. This way you can differentiate between CSS files and actually style it accordingly. This is only one way of doing it. There's a bunch of other ways of doing it. You could use JavaScript as well, but we recommend using media queries to do that. And then over here, it gives you a few more kind of default things to do. Prevent default on touch move. Also, you could do something with handling open URLs, but the main one is here. So on body load, we add an event listener for device ready. Device ready is an event that gets fired on the native side, and then when it gets fired, that's to let you know that the bridge is ready, that bridge between native and JavaScript. When it fires, it's going to fire the OnDeviceReady function, and the OnDeviceReady function is when you can actually start doing your PhoneGap API. You want to wait for this device ready to fire. So all we're doing is a native alert here. Cordova is working. We could also do something else. We could do something like, now we can go to docs here, docs.phonegap.com. We could use any of these APIs. A good one I like to use is Camera. And if you go to docs, www.phonegap.com. You don't have to go here right now, but we actually give you quick examples and full examples of how to do things. So what I want to do for now, instead of typing all of this out, I'm just going to go ahead and copy some of this HTML. We'll go ahead and replace the HTML that's already in here. I apologize for people who are having some bad network connections. I'm not sure if it's my connection or some people seem to be following along fine. Some people are having issues. And I'll go over this code in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and copy it over for now. We'll go ahead and replace all the stuff I have in here. I don't need any of this. So before I actually go over the code, let's just take a look at how it looks. Hopefully it's all working. So I can go capture photo. Oh, never mind, it won't work. Camera was obviously a bad example. But if I actually had this on my device, which I have sitting beside me, but I can't really show you, this would launch the camera. So let's just take a look at the code because of issues we're going to have testing that on the simulator. So we have the OnDeviceReady, and all they're doing is declaring two variables. Or the variables get declared here, but they're assigning values to them. And then we have on our device ready, we're going to run OnDeviceReady. So let's go to the OnDeviceReady function. We've already done that. And so when you click one of these buttons, so say click capture photo, it's going to run the PhoneGap API call, navigator.camera.getPicture. So this is the one to know. And what it does is it does a success callback, a failed callback, and some options. And our entire API is like that. It's just a success callback, a failed callback, and options. All the options you can check out on the docs site. We don't really have much time for that. But the success callback, it would call that function. So on photo data success, which is right here. And all this is doing is it's getting the element, the small image, which is in our HTML. And it's setting the style to display because it's set to hidden. It's set to display none originally. And it's setting the source of that image to the image data that gets sent to the success callback. And on error, it could just throw an error. Carlos was cracking a joke. He's saying maybe the project name should be Callback. When we originally did submit it to Apache, we did name it Callback, and it was a very confusing name. So we decided to do another rename to Cordova. All of our APIs are very simple to use. Let's just take a look at some of these instead of going through them. The connection API is a very important one. Before you submit an app to Apple, for instance, the first thing they will do is turn off the network and make sure your app can gracefully fail not having a network connection. And to test that, you would use the connection API. It could see if you're connected to an internet connection, and if you're not, then you would, in your code, handle that gracefully, maybe by doing an alert that says, oh, this app needs an internet connection. If your app doesn't need an internet connection, then that's fine, but you still want to be able to handle all cases. Excuse me. The file API, I mentioned this earlier. File transfer is a very good one. A lot of people seem to be using this. File uploads also a very good one. Very well used. But if you guys are interested in checking out the API, just go to docs.phonegap.com. It's pretty straightforward and easy to follow. And then before 2.0, we're going to be adding a lot more guides in this section. Our API might get a bit of this site might get a bit of a style change, but we're still kind of discussing things like that. Winery. So if I want to use Winery, so real quick, I'm going to hide the question thing for a second. If you guys wanted to use Winery, yes, I do. There's two ways to do it. Actually, I'll use the other way. I could run it locally, which I was just about to do, but instead I'm going to go to debug.phonegap.com. Hopefully this works and doesn't kill my network. But you would just name your project something. So I'm going to name it tester. And it's going to give me a script to inject into my code. So I can go ahead, copy this, go back to my code, which is in TextMate, not in this guy. I don't know if I closed it. I may have closed it, but go back to Xcode. I can include the script, so I'm just going to include it right here before the body tag. I just include the script, click Save, go back to Google Chrome. Actually, right before I want to run this. Hoping this works, and you can do this on your devices too. So you could have this application on your device as long as you're on the same network. And then now I should be able to debug, and hopefully, if everything works, it's going to find my device. It does look like my network's a little slow. This is why sometimes it's a little better to run it locally. My network's a little slow, so I'm going to try running it locally. So I already have it here. So server started. It looks like I may be having some issues, but let's see what happens. And it should give me, if I go to server homepage, it actually gives me a script right here. So I'm going to go ahead and inject this script into my app. Replace the one I already had. So here it is. Save that, rebuild it. Open up Winery. It's always fun when a demo doesn't work perfectly. I seem to be having some sort of weird network issues right now. I'm just going to try another rebuild. If it doesn't work, then we're just going to, you'll have to believe me. But what it does is it does remote debugging. So you can debug. So you can do your debugging from your computer over here. It's not working for me right now. I'm having some issues, but there's a YouTube video on the PhoneGap channel to see how it works. Hopefully you guys can check that out. It does work. Carlos uses it every day. I use it like almost every day too. Just having some issues today. But anyways, we got 3 minutes. Any other questions? What is the coding to building cycle? So everyone's kind of got their own cycle. The way we usually handle it, well, the way everyone does it their own way. The way I do it is I usually have my www folder as one folder, and I'll move that to different projects I already have set up, or I could use build. I do use build from occasion as well. but sometimes there is specific code you have to use for Android or iOS if that is what you're doing, and in those instances, if you include specific plugins, there is no kind of clean, good way of doing that. Right now, it's just everyone does it their own way. You could, write some scripts that would copy the www folder into each project, or things like that. We're trying to solve that issue as well with command line tooling, and hopefully by 2.0 that will be solved as well. App Store integration, PhoneGap gets accepted into all the app stores. I don't know what other kind of app store integration you're looking for, Nicholas. Greg, sounds like I need to know JavaScript to work with PhoneGap. Any JavaScript books? There's a ton of JavaScript books online. Really, the best way to start learning JavaScript is just by starting to write it. The basics are always pretty easy to pick up, but it's once you want to get to some of the more advanced topics, you're going to really want to find some good tutorials and books. There is, books like JavaScript, the good parts, and what other books have I read? It's always tough to think about this on the top of my mind. I've read a ton. I usually just look up guides online though. I know Remy Sharp's got a lot of good guides out there, lots of good demos. Check stuff out. Check some of his stuff out. Maybe just Google Remy Sharp. You can look for Crockford. He's also the guy who started with jQuery. If you want to use jQuery. Other than PhoneGap, will PhoneGap also provide PC, Mac, and Mac support? Well, a lot of people use PhoneGap. They already have developed their websites, or they're already developing the websites, or they like to really reuse a lot of the code they have used on their websites. PhoneGap's kind of a perfect use case for that. You do want to take out the chunks that aren't needed on mobile, but right now we don't have a PhoneGap version for the desktop. We do actually have them kind of in prototype. Like if you go to the repos, you can find one for Mac, and I'm sure we'll be doing one for Windows 8 when it comes out. But right now there isn't a way to do that unless you want to use the prototypes. But if you want to contribute, that'd be awesome, Ian. So there's two main ways to build your code. You could use manually through Xcode, Eclipse, and all the ones that you need, or hopefully through a command line interface by 2.0, or command line tools. Or you could use Build. And there are other services like Build as well. Appcelerator does a lot of things. I'm just replying to Gustin. Appcelerator does a lot of things nicely as well. They actually have a very kind of beautiful way of doing things as well, but generally, PhoneGap versus Appcelerator type debate. With Appcelerator, you'd have to use their specific API that they kind of have a standard way they want you to write your code. And for us, we just follow standards. We just want people to write how they've already been writing for the web in an easy way. There's a good book from Pat, JavaScript: A Definitive Guide. Or use command line for Xcode build. That's a good point, Carlos, and that is actually what we're going to be using for our command line tooling. Carlos is describing what a lot of people are already doing. People are just writing their own little scripts to kind of help with their own development environments and kind of whatever works best for them. I actually saw a prototype of our command line tooling today. Yeah, Brian does have a good repo as well. If you go to github.com/Brian LaRue, I think he has a repo called Cordova, actually. Cordova was originally named a tool that he developed to do everything through the command line. But the reason why PhoneGap's name is Cordova now is Cordova was actually the street that PhoneGap was originated on. Our old Matobi office is on Cordova Street in Vancouver. All right, guys. Looks like our time is up, so I'm going to end this. But it was nice having you guys all in here. Hopefully you guys got something out of today. If you guys have more, too bad it wasn't Callback Street. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to send me a tweet, and I can help you guys out. And join the Cordova mailing list. Thank you, Carlos. Go to cordova.io to help contribute. Cheers, guys. Nice chatting with you all.